Let's talk a little bit about the paths. So we've mapped out the network, right? And we've gone a little bit step further in that we've charted out when an activity starts and when an activity can finish. Okay. Let's talk about that critical path. We had alluded to a critical path, a key pathway of important activities that dictated the length of the entire project. And this, we call this the critical path. Yeah, a path in general is just the summation of the length of time that each of the activities on that path takes. We just sum all the activities on a given path. By path we mean from beginning to end. So there's a start and a finish, and we go from start to the finish, and there's certain paths that go from start to finish, like a maze in many ways. Okay? So we have certain paths that go from start to finish, and the length of any given path is just the summation of the duration of the activities along that path. The path that has the longest duration is called the critical path, and it dictates how long the project will take. We call it critical because it's the longest pathway, or the pathway from start to finish that takes the longest amount of time. Any delays along that path result in a delay in the duration of the entire project. Okay, so that's key. Now, when we talked about our project from before, we had certain pathways. Right? And so one of those pathways, and this will be a little tricky to follow, but we can kind of see what's going on. We can go from A to B to C, and then from C, we can go to I to J, and then from J, we can go from L to M to N. That's one pathway. Another pathway, and you'll get the idea, probably pretty quick here, A to B to C to I to J to K to N to finish. And again, there could be many, many ways. Again, following along, A, B, C, E, F, J, and then J from L to N, and then we can go again along that same path, right? Except now go take the K branch and N. And then a couple more ways to go. A, B, C, E, H, M, and then finish. And then A, B, C, D, G, H, M, and finish. Right? So many different pathways that we can go from the start to the end. Okay? And I've charted them out on a table here. Okay, so there's the different pathways. Go from A to B to C to D to G to H to M. Summing up all the activities across each one of those activities, summing them all up, 2 plus 4 plus 10 plus 6 plus 7 plus 9 plus 2 equals to 40, right? And I encourage you to do this for all the other activities. The longest path is the critical path, okay? And we see that at 44 weeks, A to B to C, E, F, J, L, N is the critical path. So where does that take us? It takes us from A to B to C to E to F, right? To J, of course no other place to go from F other than to J, and then to L, to N, and to finish. Okay? A to B to C to E to F to J to L to N, and then done. Finish. And we can see N finishes at week 44, and that's when the project is done, week 44. So that's our critical path. The activities A, B, C, E, F, J, L, and N are critical to determining how long this project is going to take. Now, if we recall, we needed to have this project take less than 47 weeks, otherwise we were going to get a $300,000 penalty. So we've met that requirement. Okay, so that's great. Now, in the future, couple of steps down the road towards the end of this unit, we're going to be thinking, how do I get down to 40? Because now I'm thinking bonus money here. But right now we know the critical path. Any delay in the activities A, B, C, E, F, J, L, or N will delay the duration of the entire project. Hence the name critical path. There are two other kind of ideas that we need to keep track of here. It's the one idea is the earliest start and earliest finish time. The other major idea is the latest start, latest finish time. So earliest start and earliest finish, just say, we're assuming with this that no delays occur. What's the earliest, exactly what it means. What's the earliest a given activity may begin? And what's the earliest a given activity may finish? So we go through there. We were sort of doing this at the very beginning. So from earliest start, earliest finish, that's fairly straightforward calculation because we get to go from beginning to end, determining when a project can begin, when a project can end. And we did that when we first mapped out our activities, right? We said, hey, A begins at the very beginning, period 0. It takes 2 weeks, so 0 plus 2, and that means the earliest finish for A is 2. When can B begins? Well, B begins, the earliest start for B is the earliest finish for the immediate predecessor activities. In fact, it's the largest of the ones, right? So B cannot begin until period 2, which is when A finishes. We had the more interesting case, for instance, when we were talking about period H, for instance, where H depends on G and H depended on E. And there, the earliest start for H was the largest of the two finish times, earliest finish times, right? When you go to do this in Excel in the lab, you'll see, the max function. It'll take the max of the two finish times for G and E, and that would be the earliest start time for H. Okay, so a little bit of a puzzle, but we get to go from beginning to end, and so there's a nice logical flow there. And we did that, right? Even before we knew this mechanical rule, we were kind of going through there, and it sort of made sense, right? Well, we always start the project starts at period 0, just by definition. And when does it finish? Well, when it begins plus how long it takes, right? It's kind of common sense, right? We've got a formal sort of explanation of it, but really, we just kind of intuitive, informal, it made sense, right? When we were finding earliest finish times, when we were sketching out the diagram, it made sense, right? So you could memorize these rules, but we've already done them, right? And earliest start, earliest finish really makes sense, and most folks kind of get that done really, really quickly. And this is essentially where we're at with the drawing of the diagram, right? We kind of go through. A starts at period 2. A starts at period 0 at the beginning of the project. Takes 2 weeks to do, so 0 plus 2 is the earliest finish time is 2. B cannot begin until A is finished. When is A finished? Well, it can be finished as early as period 2, so B can start as early as period 2. B takes 4 weeks, so 2 plus 4. E finishes, or earliest finish time, is 6 weeks. When can C begin? C begins when B ends. When did B end? B ended, the earliest finish time for B was 6, therefore the earliest start time for C is 6. And we continue on in that process. You get the whole diagram, which is again where we're at right now, and we have it set out. Interesting parts is, for instance, where an activity such as J has 2 or more immediate predecessors. When there's 2 or more immediate predecessors, J cannot begin until the later finish of the 2 immediate predecessors. So whatever one of the earliest finish times for, in this case, F and I is the biggest, the maximum, or the largest, that's when J can begin. Because J can't begin until they're both completed, right? And although I is finished in period 23, F is not finished until period 25. J, which depends on both I and F both being finished, can't start till period 25 because they're not both finished until period 25. So that's about the only challenging part with the earliest start and earliest finish. Now, the more interesting case, the trickier case actually, is latest start, latest finish. Right? And when we say latest start, latest finish, it's the latest possible start and finish time such that the entire project is not delayed. So right now we have a project that's going to take 44 weeks. So when we look at all the activities, we're determining the latest start and the latest finish for an activity, given that the project duration stays at 44 weeks. So, given that the project's still restricted to finishing in 44 weeks, what's the latest time a certain activity can end? What's the latest start that certain project must begin at? That certain activity must begin at. So we're working backwards in this particular case. So to find latest start, latest finish, we actually start with the end because we have to restrict ourselves to this 44 weeks completion time. So we start at the finish, or we start at the end, and we work our way to the beginning, which is a little bit tricky because we're very comfortable going from beginning to end. It's a little less comfortable going from end to beginning. It's kind of like reading from right to left when you've spent most of your time reading from left to right. Okay, so we're looking at latest finish times now. Okay, we're going to find latest finish times, and then with the latest finish time, use that to find the latest start time. So the latest finish time is the smallest of the latest start times of the immediate successors. It's the ones that come after. And so we have a four-step procedure for this as well. And this procedure may be just a little less intuitive. Okay. So the procedure in this case is for each of the activities that together complete the project. So this is what we have, or we have our diagram. We set the latest finish time equal to the earliest finish time of the finished node. Okay, so in this particular case, that means the latest finish time is same as the earliest finish time, so that's 44. And the latest start time is 44 because the duration is 0. Okay. So we've locked that in. Step 2. For each activity whose latest finish time has just been obtained, calculate the latest start time as just taking that latest finish time minus the duration. Right? So we're kind of going backwards from what we did with the earliest start and the earliest finish. Okay. So, for instance, let us look at N, activity N. Right? So activity N, right, latest start time for the finish is 44, so the latest finish time for N is also 44. N takes 6 periods, so we go 44 minus 6, and we get N is 38. Now we keep working backwards. Right. Let's take a look at L and K. So now we're going backwards, L and K. So if the latest start time, right, is 38 for N, that means the latest finish time for its immediate, its predecessing activities is also going to be 38 and 38. Right? As long as K is done in period 38, N will not be delayed. As long as L is done in period 38, latest finished, N's beginning will not be delayed. Perfect. Okay. Now we subtract off the durations. So 38 minus L took what, 8 weeks? 5 weeks, sorry. And so it's 33. And same thing for activity K. K took only 4 weeks, so 38 minus 4 is 34. I go back to J, and I see that the latest start time for KL is 33. The latest start time for K is 34. I take the earlier of that number. So that means that J must be done by period 33 so as not to delay the beginning of L. Subtract off the duration again, and I get 25. Duration was 8 for J. Just working up into I here. J needs to, latest start for J is 25, period 25, which means that's the latest finish for I. I must be done by period 25. Take off how long I takes. I take 7 weeks, and so I must start no later than week 18. I'll go to the next branch, F. The latest start for J is 25, so the latest finish for F must be 25. We're starting to notice a little bit of a pattern along those critical path but with those critical path activities, their latest start and earliest start times are the same. Their latest finish times and their latest finish times and their earliest finish times are the same. And that can speed up the process quite a bit when we're trying to map this out. If we know what the critical path is, we know that latest start and earliest start are the same. Latest finish, earliest finished are the same. F takes 5 weeks, so 25. Working now into E. E requires a little bit of knowledge of H, so let's drift back to the finish and go to M. M, the project finishes at week 44, so that means M must be done by week 44. Subtract off the 2 weeks that M takes, and it must start no later than week 42. There is a slide that has this all stated, the final answer, in nice, neat, typed format. So don't sweat. We want to keep the concept. So we want to keep the concept rolling here. H can must finish by no later than week 42. So its latest finish time is week 42. And take off the, how much does H take? 9 weeks. And so we get 33. Now we have the 2 successor activities to E, which are H and F. Now we can find the latest finish time for E. Latest finish time for E is the latest start time. Looking at F, we got K. F. Sorry, that should be a little 0 there. Okay, F cannot start any later than period 20. And H can start no later than period 23. The smallest of the 2 is the latest finish time for E. And latest start time minus the 4 weeks that E takes gets 16. So you'll notice that your key function, when you do this in Excel in the lab, will be the minimum function in Excel, right? We're finding minimums all the time. Okie dokie. Let's go down to G here. So from H's latest start is 33, so G's latest finish has to be 33. G takes 7 weeks, so we subtract 7 weeks off of 33, and in scratchy level, right in here, I get about 26. Okay. Then we go to D. Latest start time for G is 26, so that's the latest finish time, right? Latest finish time for D, and again, same process. Take off the 6 weeks that D takes, and we get a latest start time for D of 20. So now we're all set. We have a latest start time of 20 for D, a latest start time of 16 for E, and a latest start time for 18 for I. Take the smallest of those, and that's the latest finish time for C, which in this case is 16. Subtract off the 10 weeks that C takes, and we get a latest start time, our latest start period of 6. We're almost ready to wrap it up. We know that B and A are on the critical path, so we can pretty much shortcut this and just make them the two start times and the two finish times equal to each other. And there you go. We've now designated the latest start and the latest finish times. So it's not impossible or super tricky to do, but it is a little bit more involved than the earliest start, earliest finish. So the nice pretty diagram is the latest start, the latest finish times, which we all understand. And then the whole completed project, which is the neat form of what I was doing there. Now the textbook, and many textbooks, they've got different ways to chart this out, and whatever way works for you. Okay, so if you found a way of annotating this particular diagram in a way that works for you, it works for me too. Okay, it's all fine. Okay? Typically what I'll do is to sort of make any kind of charting or notation related to latest start and earliest starts and latest finish and earliest finishes is to put it all in a table so that there's a common format. So how you got there is whatever way works best for you, and then we'll just populate the tables so that we've sort of got a common point, and neither one of us is being too freaked out by this. Okay, one last item we want to talk about in this is this idea of slack. You may notice that on certain paths we had the latest time we could start was the same as the earliest start time that we could start, right? We had no real wiggle there. But we also noticed that there were some paths, such as our old friend activity H, where we could start it at period 33, or we could start it at period 29, and we had some flexibility there. Okay, that flexibility is a version of slack. So we have two types of slack. One is what's called activity slack. And that activity slack is the largest or maximum amount of time that a single activity can be delayed without delaying the entire project. Okay. One of the easiest things about it, calculation, is if you're on the critical path, you can't have zero slack, because by definition, any delay in an activity on the critical path will delay the project. So there is no wiggle room there. So the critical path activities by definition will have zero slack. However, activities off the critical path will have some slack. Okay? And we can calculate that activity slack either by comparing the differences between the latest start time versus the earliest start time, or the latest finish time versus the earliest finish time, right? You can look at the difference between the 29 and the 33, or the 38 and the 42 if you're looking at finish time. It doesn't matter, they're both 4, right? Same answer. Whatever works for you, whatever rocks your boat, makes you a happy camper. Okay? Do either one, doesn't matter, right? So pretty simple, and usually you can look at the graphs and you can kind of look at the diagram and they really pop out at you. So activity slack, makes sense, right? Activity H can be delayed up to 4 weeks before it becomes part of the critical path, and thus any further delays will delay the entire project. So we can have our hypotheticals. Okay, so there's a problem with H. It took a little while for H to develop. What was H? Exterior painting. So the painters have been delayed, and they got another job that went a little bit late, and they want to know, can we come a little bit late? Well, maybe we'll make it worth your while, or you negotiate a reduction in their charge. And they say, well, if we're 2 weeks late, is that okay? And you go, yeah, we got some slack on the painting, so yes, 2 weeks is fine. So it gives you some flexibility. However, those people who are doing activities that are on the critical path, you're far less collegial and cooperative as far as delays, as far as their activities go. Free slack, little trick here than activity slack. Okay, activity slack, we just looked at the latest start versus earliest start, or latest finish versus earliest finish, and we got the slack. Free slack, conceptually, is not hard, just calculation-wise is a little bit tricky. Free slack is the time activity can be delayed before delays just the next activity, right? Activity slack was we delayed the entire project. Here, free slack is just the amount of delay in a given activity before it just delays the next activity. So far more restrictive, but a little trickier to calculate, unfortunately. So let's look at that. We have a formula here. Now, just like with activity slack, if you're on the critical path, no slack at all, free or activity. So that makes our life a little bit easier as we look at the critical path activities of A, B, C, E, F, J, L, and N. No free slack there, no activity slack. Okay. Activities off of that path will have some activity slack, but they may not have free slack. So this is where it gets a little tricky. Okay. So if you're not on the critical path, if you're an activity not on the critical path, you will have some activity slack. You may or may not have free slack. So you can have positive activity slack with no free slack. Okay. So free slack. It's usually the slack nobody likes. It's done well. It's not like you don't like it. You just don't like to calculate it because it's a little bit of causes some heartburn. Okay, so let's look at some obviously non-critical path activities. So we'll start from the end. Let's say let's look at M, and so we look at our formula. And so we want to be very careful with the formula because we keep it very procedural. Earliest start of the next activity, so that's the finish, so that's 44, minus the early finish of the current activity, early finish, which is 40. Right? And so that gives us a free slack of 4 weeks, which means that M can be delayed up to 4 weeks before delaying the finish of the project, which is the next activity in this case. Now, let's go up to, let's say, H. Okay, looking at H, following again the formula, earliest start of the next activity, which would be M, which is 38. Earliest finish of the current activity, which is H, is 38. 0. So no free slack for H. Right? No free slack for H. There is activity slack, which we know, but no free slack. Any delay in H will delay the beginning of M. So let's look at another non-critical path activity. Our friend activity K. Does K have any free slack? Well, again, let's look at the earliest start for the next activity, which is N, which is 38, minus the early finish of K itself, and 38 minus 37 is 1. So K will have 1 week of free slack. Okay? K can be delayed up to 1 week before it has an impact on when N may begin. Okay? And so that is essentially how free slack works. Okay? Let's look at one more time. We'll look at G and then we'll look at I. So let's look at G again. Okay. Again, always only looking at non-critical path activities. If it's on the critical path, there is no slack. Okay, so look at a G, and we see that for G, the earliest start of the next activity. Okay, that's H. Earliest start is 29. Earliest finish of G is 29. 29 minus 29 is 0. So no free slack for activity G. Any delay in G will cause a delay in H. Let's look over here at I. One last one. And hopefully we'll get it here. I, earliest start of the next activity, which is in this case J, which is 25, minus the earliest finish of I itself, which is the current activity. So 25 minus 23, 2 weeks. So I has a free slack of 2 weeks. I can be delayed up to 2 weeks before it delays J. Okay. So I encourage you to try to work through that one. That one's the trickiest one of the batch. And here's the answer. So you can see that free slack, there's really only a few activities. We've done them all, by the way. A few activities with free slack. And that's I, that's K, and that's M. Everybody else, all the other activities, there is no free slack. Okay? However, you can kind of see where there's slack or activity slack. Sometimes slack and activity slack get used interchangeably because most of the time when when slack is referred to, activity slack means slack. Okay? Free slack is the one that is not focused in on so much, so we keep its little adjective free in there because that's important. Okay? So that sums up our journey into that particular topic. Okay. Now, next step is to analyze the costs and start to think about what's the overall topic of what we call crash costing or minimum cost schedules. And those are important, and they'll be important to us because remember, at the beginning, we wanted to make sure our project took less than 47 weeks so that we avoided the $300,000 penalty. However, if we can get the project down to 40 weeks, we get a $150,000 bonus. Now, we've already determined the project duration to be 44 weeks. So if we can reduce the time that this project takes by 4 weeks, we're going to get that bonus. So this whole next segment really gets into, okay, so what's going on there? How do I do that? How do costs come into this whole project management procedure? Because right now we've just talked about times and activities and organization and successor activities and preceding activities. Now we're going to start to bring costs into our analysis. Stay tuned.